The story began with the girl desperately screaming that His Majesty could not just leave her. Her words about being his life partner made no impression on Emperor Alex Casa. His expression remained unchanged, no matter how many tears his wife shed. Moreover, he stated that he never considered Rebellia to be his only one, so he did not understand why she thought so. He reminded her of the existence of Empress Aisha, whom Rebellia had always considered just a concubine. Hearing this, the emperor laughed maliciously and told her that she had been living in her own illusions. Only now did Rebellia finally realize that, for her, everything was irrevocably over. However, she could not believe that her own husband could be so cruel to her. At that moment, Alex hugged his new wife, saying that he was taking away Rebellia's status as empress. Aisha blinked her cute eyes and silently observed the situation, wanting to seem innocent. Then, she suddenly turned away sharply, avoiding the gaze of the emperor's ex-wife. Rebellia, on the other hand, peered with all her might at the two people in front of her, searching for even a drop of pity in them. But Casa dispelled all the lady's last hopes by informing her that he had simply used her father, Blanche. The former empress could not believe that she had never really been loved and that the whole marriage had been a lie. She desperately stretched her hands toward the emperor, hoping that he was just joking or that this was all a bad dream. But no matter how much Rebellia screamed, sitting on the cold floor, absolutely nothing changed around her. The main character could not bear such a sad fate for the girl from the book, so she was horrified. She did not understand why the emperor could not simply separate from his wife and live apart. This story was about a lady who gets into a romance where she becomes an empress and wins the love of an emperor. There were a great many such books about love, since such a plot between couples was common. However, the reader did not understand why the emperor stopped loving Rebellia, with whom he initially had only a marriage of convenience. However, in the end, the guy fell in love with another girl and even left his first devoted wife because of this. As a result, Rebellia, who was no longer cared for by servants, died from an illness she contracted due to hypothermia. After this, the ruler placed a new empress on the throne, who was originally just a concubine. The heroine considered the character from the novel a disgusting person because he made Rebellia suffer. She was so engrossed in her novel that she didn't notice how it was getting close to the middle of the night. But the girl herself had to get up early, which is why it was undesirable to go to bed too late. So she quickly went to bed to at least regain some strength for tomorrow's work. But to her great surprise, the heroine woke up not in her own body as she expected before going to bed. Around her was old-fashioned but well-kept and neat furniture, as well as very spacious rooms. Moreover, the lady immediately noticed the not entirely modern clothes on the people around her, who obediently bowed to her. Now, the girl herself looked completely different. From her appearance to her clothes, the heroine had somehow ended up in the body of a minor character named Rebellia from the book. But the girl couldn't understand how or why she had suddenly ended up in this female body. At first, the lady thought it was all a dream and tried hard to wake up, pinching herself and hitting her cheeks with her hands. However, even the cold water poured from the bucket did not help the miss wake up. It only frightened her servant. Finally, the girl had to admit that she was not sleeping at all, so it was useless to try to wake up. Then the current Rebellia decided that she should first calm down and not panic. The girl did not understand why such a quiet and obedient empress in which she found herself was not made the main one. Suddenly, the lady heard her maids talking about His Majesty and realized that they were talking about her husband. Now she would not want to see him at all because, in the novel, he made Rebellia's life a living hell. However, the heroine asked the servants to make her as beautiful as possible. The maids had long wanted to do something new with the image of their mistress, so they were very happy with this opportunity. The girls quickly ran off to get clothes and jewelry, leaving the empress alone for now. Seeing their zeal, the lady thought that she felt sorry for her assistants because they sincerely wanted to help her. The fact is that the heroine did not intend to live the life of Rebellia, but on the contrary, wanted to leave the title of empress. Although the lady was dressed very beautifully and the outfit perfectly matched her hair, the miss remained serious. She looked around and concluded that the maids had brought her to His Majesty's office. When the heroine entered, Alex smiled at her affectionately, since he had been waiting for his first wife for a long time. It was the first time in her life that she had seen a guy in person, so she was very surprised at how handsome he was. The emperor himself did not even pay attention to his wife's emotions, only asking what she wanted. Rebellia stated that she should have no special reason to meet her husband, and he invited her to sit down. Looking at him, the lady thought that the empress had to survive in very difficult conditions. The heroine guessed that she had entered the novel before the main story began, and Aisha had only been in the palace for 6 months. So at this point, Alex was just beginning to cool off towards Rebellia, leaving for his concubine. The emperor himself noticed that his wife was somewhat thoughtful, and so he asked her what was the matter. Rebellia smiled with feigned affection and cheerfulness and replied that something had indeed happened to her. Alex didn't expect this because the lady was usually extremely silent, so he was quite surprised, and Rebellia, unexpectedly for everyone, suddenly asked the emperor with a smile to divorce her as soon as possible. At first, the emperor thought that his wife was just joking because such words were insolence. But the lady was more serious than ever and fully expected that her husband would only get angry at her words. After all the time spent in the palace, Rebellia coped well with her affairs, solving internal issues according to the story in order to get at least a little love and approval from the emperor. She allowed him to be with Aisha. However, the current heroine had no intention of doing anything like that, so she really wanted to get a divorce. Rebellia said that she had been thinking about something like this for a long time, so she only sees this as an outcome for them. But the emperor did not agree with his wife because she had performed her duties well for all 3 years. However, the girl continued to insist that she was a worthless empress and therefore wanted to leave this position. The heroine declared that she was not fit to be the ruler's wife and looked at him in the hope that her husband would understand. Alex silently looked at the lady in front of him, trying to understand what was going on in her beautiful and intelligent head. The boy then asked if the empress was upset that he had not visited her personally lately. Miss didn't expect the ruler to come to exactly this conclusion, so she stared at him in surprise. Alex asked for forgiveness for his behavior, explaining that there were complicated matters in the empire. Hearing that her husband was going to come to her every day now, the lady nervously clutched her dress with her hands. She remembered Bia's heroic death very well, and therefore did not believe a single word of the emperor. So, smiling sweetly, the heroine said that her husband would surely find someone much better to take her place. The girl even said that she would not mind if Aisha became empress, but the ruler remained silent. To the great surprise of the current Rebellia, Alex suddenly said that she did not have to worry about the concubine. He explained that he had taken this lady into the palace only in order to establish communication with other states. The emperor also added that Aisha had only been here for 6 months and did not attract him. Smiling, the guy said that taking the place of his first wife was not so easy, so she should not be afraid. Rebellia looked closely at her husband's expression and realized that he thought she was jealous. But the lady did not even consider the concubine to be her rival, which she openly told the emperor. The girl stated that she simply realized that she was not suitable for the role of empress, and that is why she wanted a divorce. Smiling tenderly once again, the lady asked the emperor to let her go in peace, but it was clear from the ruler's face that he did not like this proposal from his own wife at all. Suddenly, he asked the miss whether her father would allow her to do something like this since he himself had married her off. The heroine immediately remembered Duke Blaine, who practically never appeared in the story of the novel. At the same time, the lady was very surprised that the ruler even spoke about her father, since they had not communicated. That rich man had lost the trust of the previous emperor, so he tried his best to please the current one. That is why the father personally ordered Rebellia to marry the ruler in order to win his trust. She didn't know what kind of agreement Duke Blanche had made with Alex, but she wanted a peaceful life for herself. So the girl said that according to the laws of the empire, the consent of the husband and wife is sufficient for divorce. Since the heroine had learned all the necessary legal articles, she was confident that she was on this matter. To this, the ruler objected that in the history of the empire, there had not been a single case of divorce among emperors. Alex really didn't like this whole conversation, so he couldn't even hold back and clenched his teeth. The guy asked with displeasure why the lady wanted this divorce so much and stated that he still did not agree. In his view, it was impossible to simply up and refuse the position of First Empress. Rebellia was prepared for this outcome of events, so her expression didn't even change at all. Alex suddenly and unexpectedly declared that he was ready to do anything for the girl except the divorce that she so desired. The heroine decided to use these words to get the maximum benefit. The emperor noticed that his wife was up to something, and therefore asked her not to behave so ambiguously. At this, Miss only smiled slightly since a plan of action had already formed in her head. Since the dialogue was over, Rebellia obediently bowed to the emperor, pretending to be resigned, but the girl wasn't going to give up so easily, so she left with her head held high. She understood that in order to get a divorce, she needed to come up with a more detailed plan. The heroine was walking down the corridor toward her room when she suddenly saw someone walking toward her. This person turned out to be a sweet and innocent girl with black hair and a fragile build. This was the second empress or concubine of the emperor named Aisha, who had recently appeared in the palace. It was clear from the newcomer's face that she too did not expect to see the first empress here. Since Rebellia had nothing to say to this lady, she turned away and decided to simply walk away. But unexpectedly, the second wife herself greeted the lady cheerfully, as if they were good friends. Unlike the concubine, the empress was not at all happy to meet her, as she wanted to get to her own place. The heroine noticed that Aisha was deliberately pretending to communicate well with her, although in reality, this was not the case. She asked what the girl was doing there, and she replied that she had come to meet His Majesty. Hearing that Alex had invited the lady almost into his chambers, the heroine was surprised, although she had expected such an outcome of events. Since she did not want to communicate with the second empress, Rebellia said that it was time for her to go. But suddenly the lady stopped the first wife. As it turned out, she wanted to tell her something. The heroine stopped, displeased, and asked what else she hadn't heard from the concubine. The lady did not expect that the girl would suddenly start talking about how they were both allies, should share secrets with each other. Aisha smiled kindly, but her smile remained predatory and dangerous, no matter how hard she tried. Then the second empress asked if the first was looking for a new way to attract the emperor's attention. Hearing this, Rebellia froze in place, as she did not expect the lady to make such accusations against her. The heroine realized that the concubine was not as innocent and simple as she initially thought. Based on the plot of the novel, the girl chuckled as she realized how wrong she had been about Aisha, who had turned out to be mean. The lady noticed the first empress's smile and immediately asked what was the matter, since she had not said anything funny. At this, Rebellia laughed even louder and replied that she simply found the whole situation very funny. The heroine very confidently stated that the second empress was trying to protect what belonged to her. This is exactly what the girl found funny, and she reported it to the proud concubine standing in front of her. The opponent did not expect that the first wife would say something so humiliating to her. She curled her lips in anger because she didn't like the fact that Alex was not rightfully hers at all. Rebellia noticed Aisha's emotions, which only made her smile even more, as the lady emerged victorious. So Miss turned around and said that the second one could keep the emperor for herself, since she didn't need him anyway. The heroine didn't care at all how many years Alex and Aisha lived together, as long as they didn't touch her. The heroine herself was going to become a villain, so she had her own plans for her future life. The lady was already preparing for the fact that the imperial treasury was completely at her disposal, as the emperor had said. The current Rebellia understood that returning to her world was pointless for her, and even impossible now, so the heroine hoped that nothing terrible would happen if she lived here for her own pleasure. On the same day, the first empress began to implement her plan, and ordered things to be carried. Aisha went outside and asked the miss in horror what was going on near her estate. To this, Rebellia replied with a smile that her palace was currently being renovated, so she was moving in with her concubine. But the girl was against this circumstance because she wanted to live peacefully in her estate alone. Seeing such furious emotions on the second empress's face, the first one grinned maliciously, as this was what she wanted. Having decided to become a real villain, the first thing the heroine came up with was to move to her rival's palace. The second empress could not even think about such a thing, so she did not have time to do anything to resist. According to the book, from the moment Alex turned away from Rebellia, The servants also stopped caring for her. The lady remembered that, as a result, she contracted an illness because of this and died soon after. No matter how modestly Aisha lived in the novel, the emperor still filled her entire palace with luxury items. Since the heroine did not know when they would get divorced, she decided to first renovate her estate. She had a great excuse for why she had to move in with her concubine, since it was impossible to live in a house that was being renovated. So the lady, with a feigned joyful smile, announced to Aisha that she would live with her for a while. The second empress tried to object, but the first declared that they would have much more fun together. But Rebellia hinted that if the concubine didn't like something, she could move out of her own palace. The girl tried to prove that, in fact, this estate was hers, and she had no right to say so. First, listening to Aisha screaming that she shouldn't move out, the heroine watched her carefully and seriously. The lady approached her rival and said that they were both good girls, so they could live together. Aisha couldn't object to such words, no matter how much she disliked the whole situation. For the first time, the girl realized how much she hated her first wife, but was forced to remain silent, realizing that she shouldn't show her true emotions. The lady tried to calm down and only then spoke. Putting on a sweet face, she blinked her eyes innocently and asked if the emperor would approve of all this. The first empress expected such pretense from her rival, so her expression did not change at all. She just laughed, thinking to herself that the lady had suddenly become suspiciously attentive and kind. The heroine guessed that the concubine would go and complain to the ruler about her actions, but she was not afraid of this. So she insincerely thanked the girl for worrying about her reputation in front of her husband. The second empress could no longer stand this, so she did not answer and ran away. A little later, when Rebellia was drinking tea, the emperor actually suddenly burst in on her. Alex said he couldn't believe his ears when he learned from Aisha about his wife's antics. He stated that never in the history of the empire had there been such a case where an empress and a concubine lived together. In response to this, the heroine only laughed and reminded the ruler that he himself had allowed her to do whatever she wanted. So the lady was confident that she was right, because she was only doing what His Majesty himself had allowed her to do. The emperor guessed that the miss was deliberately trying to provoke his emotions, and this only made him more angry. Rebellia was prepared to be scolded for her behavior, but she couldn't help but frown at it. However, she was going to play the villain until the end, so she asked what the ruler would do if he wanted this particular palace. The heroine once again reminded Alex that it was he who allowed her to achieve whatever she wanted. The husband stared at his wife because he knew that she was completely right, so he could not object. Alex tried his best to come up with a way to outwit the empress, who had decided she wanted to divorce him, and the heroine was perfectly aware of her impunity. So she smiled cheerfully, looking at her husband. Finally, the guy sighed and said that the lady could do as she wanted. In response to this, Rebellia smiled happily since her hands were now completely free. The miss was surprised that the ruler was so reluctant to divorce her, but she didn't say anything about it. The emperor himself asked the first empress to at least not make unnecessary noise for her own sake. The heroine was surprised that the guy even talked about it because she could do whatever she wanted, being fully confident in her abilities. The miss said that she would look at the behavior of the concubine. Raelia believed that Aisha would not sit idle, but for some reason, even after some time, nothing happened. This greatly amazed the girl because, even if she were to live in the palace temporarily, the miss was going to furnish it. As a result, she had even more things than the concubine herself, who had lived in her estate much longer. However, even this forced the second empress to remain silent, which puzzled the first one quite a bit. No matter how large the concubine's palace was, the two wives still often encountered each other, and at such moments, Aisha pretended not to see or hear Rebellia, only to show how much she didn't like the situation. Looking at the lady's face, the heroine saw how much she was experiencing such injustice, but the heroine herself could not come up with any other reasons for divorce, which made her upset for some reason. No matter what she did, the emperor was unwilling to grant her the divorce she desired. However, according to the original plot, Rebellia existed only as a secondary character, so the heroine had no intention of staying in this role for long. Also, because she wanted to live, since the lady was not going to live in peace, she decided to do some more mischief. As a villain, The miss turned to the servants and asked them to invite someone so that she could choose new outfits for herself. Rebellia was going to live in luxury, not like her character in the novel, because it was much more fun. As a result, the first empress dressed in an ordinary robe, in which she greeted guests. The servants who admitted this whispered that the girl had even thrown away all of her existing clothes, and other assistants confirmed this, saying that the lady gave some of the clothes to them. The heroine herself, at that moment, was sitting on a soft chair and waiting for her to be offered dress options. One of the famous designers was the first to approach her and ask how the lady liked the selected images. He handed the Empress a catalog prepared especially for her, in which all the clothes matched the Miss's hair. Rebellia immediately noted that the outfits offered to her were indeed good, as expected. The girl had never in her life worn such things, let alone even dared to touch them. She worked hard to earn money for her brother, who wanted to study abroad. As a result, the heroine was also able to get into the university and could not stand it when her brother and father again turned to her for money. The girl told her family that she would now live only for herself, and they could do whatever they wanted. Her brother and father tried to call out to her to stop, but the lady no longer wished to listen to their pleas and reproaches. However, as a result, Miss still sent money to her family, even after she left her home. So the life of a rich life now was too different from the life of the heroine before. Rebellia understood that, in the past, she would have been ready to fall on her knees for such things, just to wear them for a little while. Moreover, the designer himself was clearly excitedly expecting her to give him a good assessment of his abilities and ideas. Only the lady had to play the role of the villain, so she smiled and said that the whole thing was just disgusting. Moreover, the Empress stated that only this designer could have created something so terrible. Upon hearing this, the man initially thought he was imagining things, so he asked again. But the emperor's first wife continued to claim that the designer certainly had something more interesting. For the first time in his life, the fashion designer was told that his works of art were ordinary rags, and at that moment, Rebellia demanded that he tell her what else was prepared in his collection. Only the designer, bowing his head, admitted that he had prepared only this outfit for her. He said it would take him 2 months to create another dress, but the lady was not going to wait that long. Here, the heroine remembered that Aisha was supposed to have a meeting with this same man the following week. The fact is that clothing for the imperial nobility was always made exclusively to order. This is because aristocrats were particularly intolerant of each other, wearing identical outfits, and the concubine was a special client among the designers, so they fought hard among themselves for her orders. The outfit that such a noble person chooses will certainly be covered in the newspapers and will attract the attention of society. However, the man said that the design chosen by his second wife was suitable only for her. From the way the designer justified himself, Miss immediately understood that Aisha had not yet reserved the dress sketch. This slightly angered the Empress, and she demanded that the designer bring her the catalog anyway to teach him a lesson. The lady waved her hand and called for security, which greatly frightened the designer. It worked, so the man immediately brought other sketches, among which the Miss chose all. But he could never have expected that his first wife would choose all the dresses presented at once. However, the heroine continued to insist on her own and therefore gave the catalog back to the master. She repeated with a smile that she wanted all 14 outfits and would not tolerate any objections. In fact, Rebellia had no intention of wearing them, but planned to gradually sell them after the divorce. A little later at the emperor's meeting, the count raised the question of how much money the empress had spent on dresses. Others immediately supported the man, as this was the first time they had encountered such spending on clothing. Those close to him tried to convey to the ruler that his first wife had spent a large sum of money in a short period of time. For now, Alex listened silently to all this indignation and only became angrier inside himself. However, one of the counts had not noticed this yet, so he once again asked His Majesty to listen to their words. This forced the ruler, due to his inner experiences, to even begin to lightly tap his fingers on the table. Meanwhile, the men could not calm down and continued to hint at Rebellia's extravagance. To Alex, all their words were just a set of sounds from ungrateful, aristocratic mouths. Finally, the emperor could not bear it any longer and asked a question in a cold voice. which made all the counts shudder. The guy said with a smile that he kept quiet only because he was curious to see how far they could all go. He reminded everyone present of the poem about how their empire would always be rich. But one of the counts still could not understand what His Majesty was getting at, although he was frightened by his reaction. Then Alex said that there was no way their finances could be drained by just a couple of dresses. The guy was sure that, being an emperor, he should be the most imperial in his assistants. After these words, none of the aristocrats dared to say a word, so they all lowered their heads. Suddenly, the ruler turned to the quietly sitting financier, who became even more frightened because of this, and the guy, his eyes flashing, asked if he really doubted the correctness of his choices and decisions. Since the man began to stupidly justify himself, Alex stated that he had once mistakenly put him in this place. The aristocrat did not expect such a decision at all, so he froze in place because he was afraid to hear further words. As a result, the ruler fired the man and even gave him a punishment of house arrest for 3 months. As the guards led him away, the financier begged Alex with various words to change his mind, but it was useless. After this, all the other aristocrats forgot all their indignation toward the empress. They even agreed that the emperor's first wife should wear more expensive clothes than she had already bought, just in case. The ruler still asked if anyone had any objections to his words. Since everyone was silent, the guy asked his secretary to give his first wife an expensive dress. The man calmly bowed to the emperor as a sign that he would carry out his order without question. Only after this, when he had established obedience among the counts, did the ruler continue the main meeting. When it was finished, the emperor walked down the corridor with his secretary and discussed the results. The ruler was extremely pleased that he had managed to so cleverly remove the financier from his position, something he had wanted for a long time. The assistant reminded him that it would be better if Alex was not suspected of abuse of power. He was worried that a wave of rumors would start that the emperor was a very capricious person. After listening to the old man, the guy said that he still didn't understand too much about governance. Alex believed that the best way to gain the respect of the aristocrats was to scare them enough. At the same time, the ruler smiled too madly, so it became clear that nothing mattered to him. The emperor declared that the more bad rumors there were about him, the more he would like it. Moreover, the guy admitted that if he had been interested in a good reputation, he would not have overthrown his own father. The secretary listened attentively to his master and realized that he could not argue with anything. The old man remembered very well the circumstances under which the current ruler received the throne. Alex was able to defeat almost all of his enemies and thereby greatly expand the borders of his empire. But there were still many young aristocrats who were ready to oppose him. The secretary knew that the emperor had so far skillfully ignored them and thwarted all attacks. But he didn't know what the empress would think when she found out that her husband had sent her another dress. This gift was delivered to the lady quite soon in a beautiful box, which she did not expect at all. Curiosity overcame common sense in Rebellia, so she quickly unpacked the package. Imagine the girl's surprise when she discovered how many precious stones there were on this dress. Moreover, it was entirely sewn with gold threads, which made the outfit even more expensive and elegant. The heroine could not even imagine that one day in her life, she would touch something so elegant and expensive with her hands. She asked the servants where the dress came from, and they immediately informed her that it had been sent to the lady personally by His Majesty himself. One of the assistants was even able to recall that this outfit was quickly sewn by order of the emperor. The first empress was extremely surprised when she heard that this dress cost as much as one castle. She realized that she would never be able to wear it because she would be afraid of ruining it with even a drop of sweat. The lady still did not understand why the ruler had sent her the dress. Then the servant remembered that he had also sent a letter. In it, Alex wrote that he really hoped to see his wife in this outfit the next time they met. But what was written surprised the girl even more, since she did not understand anything. The heroine was most worried about what the emperor had planned because, in the novel, he didn't care about her. Suddenly, the lady was pulled out of her heavy thoughts by a maid who noted that the dress was very beautiful. Rebellia didn't expect that even the servants would admit that she had never seen anything so beautiful. But the girl herself was not sincerely happy that she had finally received such a valuable gift. The the assistant suddenly declared that sincerity always wins, and the ruler suddenly noticed her. These words only made the heroine think even more about what was happening and about the gift. Another girl suddenly shouted at the talkative maid because the servant had said too much. The assistant bowed to the empress and asked her forgiveness for suddenly starting to chatter. Seeing how scared the girl was, the heroine smiled and said that everything was actually fine. These words calmed the assistants, who had already become afraid that their friend would end up being punished. But the current rebellia could not be angry with the maids who had always sincerely cared for her. So she was very grateful to them for the fact that the girls always stayed on her side. However, the lady was a little sad, as the assistants did not understand at all what she really needed. But Miss had no intention of scolding them for this, and besides, she had much more important things to do than all this. For example, right now, the heroine had no idea what to do with the dress she was given, which cost as much as a castle. On the other hand, the lady still wanted to live more luxuriously than ever before, but the lady did not believe that the emperor, out of the kindness of his heart, simply decided to give her something. At this point, the maid asked if the empress would like to try on her gift, but Rebellia replied that she was not going to wear the dress, so it should be put away in the wardrobe. By the next morning, the main ballroom was laid with every possible dish and beautifully decorated for this Friday dinner. The heroine wore a dark blue dress since she didn't want to stand out just yet. She was planning on becoming a villain a little later, but for now, her priority was to study the situation. Every evening, many aristocrats would flock to the imperial palace for fellowship and food. But the heroine could not believe that such a tradition had been maintained since the time of the third emperor. In any case, the previous rebellia had planned this event very well, and the current one was not going to give in. She had to allocate a limited budget in order to decorate everything as luxuriously as possible. Only after reading the documents was the lady surprised, since not everyone could handle such calculations. Then a man came up to her and said that the miss had, as always, arranged a wonderful evening. This man turned out to be Count Batet, whom the heroine remembered very well from the history of the novel. She watched his lips move and wondered what this minor character was doing here. Miss knew that he was one of Aisha's assistants, and therefore he had once taken the throne from her previous one. She thought the Count was a complete fool, so she stood up abruptly and went over to him to talk. Batet looked at the Empress's face and was very surprised when he saw that she was laughing. Meanwhile, the heroine frankly told him that he shouldn't smile at her so falsely. She said that the man's words did not warm her soul at all, but he did not understand at all what was happening. Batet said that he had indeed sincerely expressed his admiration for the lady's work, but to this, Rebellia replied that, for some reason, he had never thanked her for anything in the previous 3 years. The Count had no excuse for the situation, so he began to worry and could not say anything. So the Empress, after her words, silently turned around and proudly left the man alone. She didn't care what the Count said, also because the real Rebellia had already disappeared, and the heroine wasn't interested in any of this. Remembering the lady from the novel, Miss felt a little sad but quickly realized that now was not the time for these emotions. It was much more important for the first Empress now to spend the rest of the evening calmly. She looked around and saw her husband, who was the center of attention. The wife couldn't help but notice how surprisingly handsome this guy was, and that he didn't want to divorce her. Although the heroine read the entire novel, the lines in it could not convey even half of the ruler's beauty. While the lady was looking at the guy, he suddenly met her gaze, which she had not foreseen at all. For some reason, Alex continued to stand silently at a distance and looked the girl in the eyes, and Rebellia herself, in response, did not take any action to change this strange situation. Suddenly, a concubine ran up to the emperor joyfully and excitedly, glad to see him. Aisha smiled very sweetly and told Alex that she was extremely happy to see him now at Friday dinner. But the emperor didn't even say anything to the second empress, but just looked at her silently. However, the girl was not going to give up, as she herself grabbed the ruler's hand to be closer to him. To everyone else, this gesture was a bit strange, but Rebellia knew that Aisha was the heroine in the novel. But for some reason, the first empress still could not decipher the meaning of some of the lady's views, so all she could do was watch from the sidelines as the concubine stuck to the emperor. Aisha, meanwhile, said that she had been looking forward to this dinner party so much to eat at the same table with everyone else. Alex was surprised to report that this dinner was held every week, so why was the lady looking forward to it so much? Rebellia listened attentively to the concubine's words and was surprised when she supposedly accidentally said that she liked their family. Even the emperor, who was walking slightly ahead with his second wife, told the lady not to say such words. But the heroine immediately realized that the concubine had deliberately let it slip in order to gain attention. Looking at Aisha, the first wife concluded that she was probably waiting for the moment when she could hurt her. But the heroine had a completely different goal, and she went to fulfill it and splashed wine in the face of one Maris. A man named Wilhelm was very surprised by this because it was clear that the lady did it on purpose. But Rebellia herself pretended that she accidentally dropped the glass right on his face and laughed about it. The crowd around immediately began to whisper in surprise as everyone saw the action of the first empress. The concubine played the intense fear on her lovely face so beautifully. The Marquis, in order to defend himself, shouted that the lady had obviously deliberately poured a glass of her wine on him. To this, the heroine smiled slightly and said that she had already asked for forgiveness. Wasn't that enough for him? The lady continued to insist that she was innocent, but the injured man did not believe her at all. Here, the first wife announced that her hands were not obeying her again, and she swung her arm to hit the Maris. Since no one managed to stop the girl, she gave Wilhelm a good slap in the face. Due to the surprise, the man didn't even have time to dodge, so his head was thrown back strongly to the side, and Rebellia herself was terribly happy about this sight, since she was finally fulfilling her role as a villain. The whole thing is that one night, the heroine accidentally overheard a secret conversation between her maids. In it, the girls complained that the Maris was stalking some of them, and even sending them letters. The assistant who told about this could hardly stop her hands from shaking from fear. The lady was very surprised when she heard that it was the married Mar Wilhelm who was behaving so terribly. Meanwhile, the maids continued to share their opinions as they did not suspect that they were being eavesdropped on. The girls complained to each other that they never thought that such a noble man would behave like that. They remembered that there were rumors that even his wife had once been almost sold to Wilhelm. Because of this, the assistants considered the Maris to be a very strong person who tolerated her husband's adventures. The heroine herself understood that the maids would not be able to cope with the lustful aristocrat. What angered the lady most was the fact that the man was about 30 years older than all the maids. She couldn't understand how the Maris dared to approach young girls when he was much older. This overheard conversation angered Rebellia so much that she decided to punish Wilhelm at any cost. To begin with, the lady took a deep breath in order to calm down for the moment and accumulate her anger. The heroine was going to take revenge not only for the poor assistant, but also for the previous Rebellia, who also had a bad life. That was why the lady was now very happily beating the Marquis, who fully deserved it. The people around watched the Empress with surprise and incomprehension, but she had no intention of stopping. Even the concubine did not expect such behavior from her rival, but she tried to behave quietly. Time after time, the heroine rained blows on Wilhelm, understanding that this was the best way to take revenge on him. The lady was confident that none of the aristocrats present at the evening dinner would dare to stop her. Suddenly, the second empress discovered that the ruler had taken his hand away from her, which she did not like at all. Alex shouted his first wife's name because he was the only one who could influence her. Rebellia expected the emperor to try to detain her, but she only smiled slightly at him in response. However, she still managed to hit the Marquis between the legs one last time so that he would definitely remember her forever. This shocked everyone around even more, as it was considered an extremely forbidden technique for Wilhelm. This was the last and most cruel blow he could have suffered. The man immediately fell to the floor and even screamed from such severe pain that he experienced for the first time in his life. But Rebellia only thought that she should still practice her accuracy. After this, the girl turned around as the emperor called her again and was surprised that he had managed to approach her. Alex's face showed that he was barely holding back his emotions, as he was very angry at the first empress. But this did not frighten the lady at all, since she was prepared for something like this from the ruler. With his eyes, the emperor was telling the lady that she was apparently out of her mind to allow herself to commit such an outrage. He grabbed his wife's hand tightly in front of everyone, asking why she was doing something like that. Rebellia was even a little scared and excitedly reported that the emperor simply misunderstood everything, missed all her actions completely consciously, as she wanted to achieve a divorce. She didn't feel entirely comfortable doing something nice for the frightened Aisha, but there was no other choice. The heroine expected Alex to be happy, but for some reason, he angrily asked why the lady had made such a mess. This surprised the girl so much because it was unexpected for her that she didn't even know what to answer. The ruler himself, at that moment, for some reason, changed his emotions from rage to sadness, which the miss did not expect at all. Because of these emotions, the heroine stared at the emperor as if she was seeing him for the first time in her life, and the guy suddenly just exhaled, as if he was very tired, but still did not say a word. Only after this did Alex declare that his first wife had nothing sacred if she behaved like that. However, he noticed that the lady's hands were injured, and so he asked for a doctor to be called to help her. These actions made Rebellia wonder if her husband was trying to make her feel ashamed. So Miss turned to the emperor and reported that Marcus Wilhelm needed doctors much more now. To the girl's surprise, the ruler was too lenient about the need to help the victim. The heroine categorically did not understand the emperor and why he now followed her everywhere. After examining the empress's hands, the doctor reported that she only had a couple of scratches, so there was no need to worry. However, for some reason, Alex still asked the man to do everything possible to help. Hearing this, Rebellia only became more wary because, in the novel, the ruler never paid attention to her. Miss looked at the guy's face, trying to find answers to all her current questions on it, but it was unsuccessful. Meeting his wife's gaze, the ruler suddenly broke into a joyful smile, hinting to her that everything would be fine. The girl did not expect such a turn of events, so she became embarrassed and quickly turned away. Even the aristocrats around suddenly began to whisper that His Majesty was very worried about the first empress. This surprised the guests, because the emperor always paid great attention to Aisha. The lady heard all these rumors, and inside herself desperately wanted to scream that nothing had happened between her and her husband. On the contrary, she tried to do everything to make the emperor hate her, but so far it was unsuccessful. When the doctor examined the heroine, Alex said that because of her injury, he could not allow her to continue the dinner. At this, the ruler met the gaze of his first wife and winked at her cheerfully, which the lady noticed. The empress did not understand at all what the emperor had been trying to tell her all this time, so she became embarrassed. Meanwhile, the ruler himself embraced the lady who rose to her feet because he wanted to go with her. The heroine noticed how many glances she instantly gathered around her and glanced towards Aisha. Rebellia wanted to understand what the concubine was feeling at that moment, having lost the center of attention. Indeed, the girl was extremely angry about everything that happened, although she tried not to show it. The heroine was not surprised that the second empress looked overly agitated. As a result, all because everyone around did nothing but discuss the situation with his first wife nonstop. The lady was sure that tomorrow the newspapers would publish an article about how Alex had treated her in front of everyone. It suddenly occurred to Rebellia that this was exactly what the emperor was trying to achieve, because he was afraid of public opinion about the divorce. However, no matter how much Rebellia looked at the guy's face now, she couldn't understand anything. Rebellia felt like a toy in the hands of the emperor, and he himself, as if nothing had happened, continued to conduct the event. Rebellia had to admit that the ruler was doing a good job of handling these duties, even though he was not prepared. Looking at the luxurious food placed on the tables, the heroine wondered what the chefs were preparing for the evenings that took place once a year. But in the end, the lady decided to throw all thoughts out of her head for now, because even villains needed to eat normally. Then Alex leaned over to Rebellia and whispered that she especially needed to eat something, because she had lost a lot of strength. The girl did not perceive these words of the guy as concern, since she could not believe anything like that. Aisha suddenly entered the conversation, praising Rebellia's dress with a gentle smile. At the same time, the concubine stated that she preferred something simpler and more discreet to such luxurious dresses. The first empress did not understand why the second wife was saying all this, because she considered such words to be an unworkable scheme according to the plot of the novel. Aisha, who was the main character, was described as poor and therefore thrifty. And according to this, the lady stated that she was extremely ashamed to look at some overly expensive outfits. Hearing this, many of the aristocrats smiled, as they considered the girl to be as sweet and innocent as she tried to appear. But Rebellia clearly saw that Aisha was just playing for the crowd, which she didn't like at all. But Rebellia wasn't going to do anything about it. The first wife wanted to remind her concubine that she herself was planning to meet with a fashion designer, but Alex suddenly distracted Rebellia from her thoughts and also interrupted his second wife, which surprised her. The emperor suddenly noticed that the first empress had not tried on the expensive dress that he had given her yesterday. The heroine was surprised by this question, as she did not understand why Alex raised this topic now. She looked closely at the guy's face, trying to guess why he was pretending that they were on good terms. What the lady didn't like most was that everyone around her took the ruler's words as the real truth. Rebellia was angered by the fact that her husband's words were said only for the sake of good public opinion, so the lady decided to make things worse on purpose and declared that gifts like a simple dress were not suitable for her at all. Instead, the empress, with a sly smile, suddenly demanded from her husband an entire castle or even a city. The aristocrats, who immediately heard such an impudent request, began to discuss it with great surprise, and the heroine herself was extremely pleased with her demand, because, being an emperor, she would have considered this very inappropriate. But when the lady looked at the ruler, she did not see anger at all, but rather a seemingly satisfied grin. Rebellia did not expect such a turn of events, and the guy suddenly asked again if she wanted the city. Then he gently took the lady by the hand and said that even a whole huge city would still not be enough for her. Moreover, Alex declared in front of everyone that he believed that even the entire empire could not compare with the empress. Apparently, being especially polite, the emperor asked the miss if she was not the foundation of his state and his only wife. The girl could not react calmly to such words, but instead wondered if there was something wrong with the ruler's head. She wanted a divorce, not to squander the entire imperial treasury, which her husband was now kindly offering her. For a moment, Rebellia was afraid that the ruler might actually give her a dress worth an entire city. Then, Aisha suddenly entered into the conversation between them and said that she didn't need to be given such an expensive outfit. The heroine did not expect that the concubine would continue to play the role of a very modest person. Meanwhile, the girl added that a person's value does not change depending on his clothes. Therefore, she believed that if the emperor continued to be with her, then a modest outfit would be enough for her. The noble people who listened to the speeches of the sweet and gentle empress gladly took her side, but Rebellia herself could not believe that Aisha could say such absurd things. For some reason, suddenly His Majesty himself, who had been listening to the lady's words all this time, asked her what she was talking about. Alex was angry at the concubine for saying that she had no fortune, since the ruler himself had personally allocated her a large budget. The girl did not expect that for her attempt to be more modest, she would end up being scolded, so she did not know what to answer. The emperor declared that by pretending to be poor, the lady was disrespecting those who truly had nothing. The heroine listened attentively to the guy's words, since in the novel, he never scolded the second empress. And indeed, the ruler scolded Aisha for the first time, so much so that she even squeezed her dress tightly in her palms, due to stress. Gritting her teeth, the girl quietly replied that she understood all the emperor's words perfectly, so he didn't need to repeat them again. However, Rebellia was not at all moved by the concubine's remorse, as she was sure that she would again play a sweet role. What the lady was most worried about now was whether Alex had said something similar to the second empress in the novel or not. No matter how much the girl tried to think, she could not remember that such a dialogue ever took place. However, the atmosphere in the hall among the other people was still surprised, which meant that the heroine was still far from her goal. However, misunderstood that it was impossible to decide anything right now. So, she thought of at least eating. Rebellia suddenly realized that even aristocrats had some principles according to which they behaved as authoritative people. Suddenly, Alex broke the silence among the guests and asked if anyone would agree to drink with him. So the first empress, like the other guests, raised her glass together with the emperor, but for some reason, the lady felt a thrill inside her and decided to drink until she outranked her husband. When the alcohol affected the heroine's mind, she went wild and began giving everyone instructions on when to serve what food. The aristocrats listened to the lady and were surprised, as they did not expect her to be so picky about the servants. Rebellia heard all these rumors about her, becoming angrier, but she only liked it. Aisha, on the contrary, tried to behave as sweetly and quietly as possible in order to evoke only good emotions in others. But the first empress didn't care at all about other people's opinions, so she ate a lot of different foods. Alex watched his wife's behavior closely, but it was unclear what exactly he was thinking about. After this dinner party, Rebellia sat in Aisha's palace for some time and did not create any problems for anyone. It was only a few days later that she received a letter inviting her to tea from Duchess Ceylon. The heroine did not know what to think about this noble lady, since she was never mentioned in the novel, so the reason why this woman sent her an invitation remained unknown to the lady. Miss specifically studied all the documents with Rebellia Rel at the very beginning, but Ceylon was not in them. In the Empress's mind, there still remained the possibility that the unknown Duchess could be her friend. In that case, some acquaintance of only a minor character might indeed not have been mentioned in the story. Looking at the invitation, the girl understood that if the Duchess really was her friend, then she could not be ignored. Failure to respond to a friendly letter could lead to trouble in the form of suspicion. Moreover, the heroine tried to hardly change the character of the original Rebellia and act in her style, so she was afraid that she would end up being considered crazy and burned at the stake for deliberately avoiding communication. After all, the girl's real goal was divorce, not death, so she had to act thoughtfully. Eventually, the lady realized that even if Ceylon was not her friend, she was still interested in knowing why the invitation was sent, since Rebellia still needed to gather information. Miss decided to go out and visit rather than sit within four walls.